Hello you, it's me. Today we're going to talk just a really quick review about a very short book I just finished, which is Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. So this book's set in Germany, in a non-specified time period, but I feel like it's probably mid-1800s when the book was written. One thing I think the book does really well in that vein is capture the feel of sort of a mid-European wilderness, and does use the occasional Germanic German word and really helped serve me to build imagery in my head around that. It's about a young girl who lives with her father in a mansion or a castle called a Schloss in the middle of sort of a forest, wild area, with their neighbours being the residents of sort of other castles and mansions days and days ride away, so she's really lonely. One day on a road near their home, she's out with some of the maids. They see a carriage overturn and they help. And while the mistress of the carriage sort of continues in her journey, the young girl protagonist of this story, Laura, begs her to let her daughter stay with them in the castle to recover from the accident because she is so lonely. And while this young girl, Carmilla, is staying at the castle with the protagonist, her health deteriorates, the young girl falls for Carmilla, and all sorts of strange things begin to happen. This is really from an era, and I think you do see it a little bit in Dracula, where vampires are less defined by an aesthetic and the action of drinking blood than the trail of death they leave behind them, almost like a disease. And that's captured in this interaction between a human and a vampire on what is essentially just one stop in the vampire's journey as she flees the fallout of another human interaction she's just had, like a parasite passing from host to host. It was a bit funny to read what clearly would have been a big twist at the time, getting near to the end of the book, and it's like, she's a vampire! I think people nowadays have had enough exposure to that as a really common thing in the media, that they can see this coming 5 miles away. It's not surprising at all. But yeah, that's the big twist in this book, and I don't really think that's a spoiler, because this is shelved as a vampire book straight away. Being a big vampire fan, I'm always interested in seeing different interpretations of vampire physical characteristics and sort of physiology, the biology of how they work. So this one doesn't appear to be affected by sunlight, does, like Dracula, appear to be able to transform, and also has the long central tapering tooth that we see in Dracula, because he actually has in his book not canines but his front two incisors tapering to a point, and in this book somebody points out to Carmilla that she is possessed of a long tooth. So I think that's sort of in a similar vein as Dracula. She is wise and reticent and cold beyond her years, but still seems to deal with the fallout of her actions almost like a stroppy child, sulking when a funeral goes past and whinging about things dying and being fragile. And the idea of over-exaggerated vampire emotions crops up a lot in Anne Rice's stuff, so this may well have been inspiration for that. So the main character describes almost a dual feeling towards Carmilla. A love and adoration, but also a disgust that she can't pinpoint. I was unsure whether this was in reference to a glamour-like spell cast over the subject by a vampire in the way that they seduce their victims as prey, or a genuine attraction to Carmilla by the main character in an era where that sort of thing was more taboo and less accepted, i.e. having a romantic feeling and then the guilt, disgust being like, oh, why am I feeling like this? I know this is taboo. Either way, Carmilla behaves in a very sexual way towards the protagonist. So her sexuality is clear and her willingness to seduce a woman is not in question at all. There is a fine line in this book with the sexiness aspect of it, and it is unclear whether the attraction of the main character stems from adoration and a feeling of genuine sexual attraction, or if it stems from the main character's isolation and loneliness and their desire to reach out and form a passionate, emotional connection with anybody. I mean, this girl cried and sobbed when her dad's friend couldn't come to visit and bring his daughter with her because their life is just so boring and mundane in a castle in the middle of nowhere with just her dad and the maids. Basically, there are a lot of ways the feelings in this book can be interpreted. I would be inclined to read into the LGBTQ plus side of it, even though it's not overtly discussed and it is very subtle. And I think there's clearly some sexual tension in here, and I feel like that might make this book interesting for the time period it was written in. I say that, but I haven't read much from the same time period besides sort of Dracula, Mary Shelley stuff, so I'm assuming it's a progressive theme. It's a very short book. I would recommend it to anybody, diehard horror fan, because I'd love to hear the way that other people interpret it, because there are a lot of arguments over the content of this book. It's actually anthologized a lot. It's essentially a short story. I mean, my copy's only, 107 pages, I think, and that's with fairly big print. It is teeny weeny. One thing I do want to talk about is the fact that I really strongly feel that Bram Stoker stole this entire book and reskinned it as Dracula. Besides how they meet the vampire, the plot is almost identical. Person staying with the vampire in a castle, in awe of them, almost attracted to them in some ways, and their health slowly deteriorates as a result of the relationship. Dream sequences in which the reality is blurry and it's unclear whether they're having a visitation by the vampire or just an obsession dream. The vampire disappearing in the middle of the night, taking the form of an animal, travelling to the vampire's lair and knocking it off in exactly the same way that they kill Mina's friend in Dracula. The total Deus Ex Machina appearance within the last few pages, last couple of chapters, of somebody who just so happens to be an expert on this kind of thing, cough cough Van Helsing, and tells them exactly what they need to do to kill it. These authors did both live in the same time period. This one was actually published 26 years before Dracula, but the author died before Dracula was released. They were both Irish horror authors. They may well have moved in the same circles, so I would posit that Bram Stoker is a bit of a thief. This book's interesting. There's lots of different ways to think about it and interpret it. I'd love to hear yours if you have read it. I'm going to give this one 3 stars because I liked it, but it didn't blow my mind. I'll probably read it again. I might get more from it the second time. It's a vampire book. I'm a vampire fan. What are you reading now? Is there anything you'd like me to read? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought of this book, what you thought of the review. Thanks very much for watching. And I know this was a short video. But yeah, see you soon.